So after our wait, we are now underway. This is the beginning of the elimination rounds of the Baltimore Open. The team entering as one of the heavy favorites stayed at the top of the tournaments. They played all 6 of their matches today at table 1. It's the pro team of Ben Stark, Matt Nass, and Sam Pardee.
Had a pretty good tournament to this point, that is for sure.
And thanks to them being the 1 seed going into the elimination round, Sam starts on the play, and especially in a format like Legacy, that becomes so important.
This matchup less so than a number of the other matchups you could see in the format where both players are just kind of taking their time casting brainstorms.
Yeah, and you see Sam waiting to do one on turn 2. Goes ahead and brainstorms. Players in the elimination rounds, remember, have access to each other's deck lists, so he doesn't have to worry about something like Stifle off a polluted Delta.
Right. In general, in Legacy, Stifle is at a long time low. I think you just kind of play into it more than you wouldn't.
Yeah, so, you know, you see him right now with his lander up, not playing around Days, for example. That's not something that Eric English's deck features either. Now plays Polluted Delta to complete the brainstorm, putting back 2. He'll have the ability to shuffle it away.
As you look at the versions of the cards in English's deck, you can tell he's been at Legacy for a while. Foil, Onslaught, Polluted Delta, Black Border, Dual Lands.
Foil versions a lot of cards, and especially one of the more interesting ones, though, is seeing foil cards in a deck like Food Chain. Wonder if that's he's been on it for a while. His first play will be Baleful Strix, and this is going to show some of the strength against a removal deck like Sam Pardee's.
Yes, that card will always replace itself once it resolves. Trades with anything in combat. This is really good if your opponent is casting generally honest creatures. The edge that Pardee has in his deck is that he has 4 copies of True Name Nemesis. That's really his way around this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And Food Chain, a choice of multiple day 2 competitors, though off the radar really before this tournament. All right, one thing we actually saw at Baltimore this weekend in both Modern and Legacy is that these are formats where degenerate combos exist. You know, there aren't really combo decks in Standard, but both Legacy and Modern seem to be heading to a spot where it's a battle of the fair decks. You know, you see things like, rather than players, you know, we're not seeing so much Storm, for example, no Storm decks in day 2 in Legacy, but we are seeing players playing these like big Haymaker card advantage decks, you know, trying to go bigger, be better in a removal fight. We're seeing that in the Modern decks and the Legacy decks.
Any Legacy player can tell you that the format has a lot of very powerful generic interaction, and the combo decks, if you're skilled with a brainstorm, you can beat them pretty reliably. I think that's also generally true in Modern, though it's a less popularly held belief in that format as well. Things like Thoughtseize and Mana Leak, very powerful generic interaction in that format.
So it's going to be the Leovold, Emissary of Trest, the first card for Sam Pardee. And this is one of the newer additions to Legacy. It's a 2-of in Sam's deck. The Legend from Conspiracy actually making its way into Legacy. The 3/3 Elf Advisor states this: Eric cannot draw more than 1 card per turn, and whenever a permanent Sam controls is the target of any spell or ability of his opponents, Sam draws a card. Kind of along the lines of this fair fight, it's hard to get Leovold off the table without giving your opponent another card.
And for Eric, answers, he really just has Abrupt Decay in his deck. He can play a game through this one. Makes a lot of his cards worse. You certainly don't want to cast a Brainstorm when your opponent controls a Leovold. Yeah,
you see him casting Baleful Strix, but he's not going to get to draw off it, as Leovold is against that.
Yes.
And deciding if he wants to swing for 1. He will, and then pass. His best way to get it off the table is just to block it with Baleful Strix, but I don't think Sam will give him the option.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if we see that attack without a removal spell.
Now, the neat part around is that Food Chain has a combo element to the deck, too. And with Leovold in play, can Eric still combo?
His combo does not rely on drawing extra cards. You can use Fierce Empath to tutor for Emrakul the Aeon Sword. That's still fine. If he has Food Chain in play, he just needs to find Eternal Scourge or Mist Hollow Griffin, not get disrupted, and just build that chain up, cast Emrakul. Leovold does not stop any of this stuff.
Back to Matt Nass.
Trick is going to be finding these cards without the aid of any kind of cantrip.
Sure, yeah. If you can't ponder, Preordain, or Strix into them, you just have to draw it.
Right.
Deathrite Shaman for Sam Pardee. You see, he's also playing a rather calculated game, holding on to another copy of Brainstorm and Abrupt Decay, both in hand.
There's also 3 copies of Manipulate Fate in Eric English's deck, and that was the card he just drew for this turn. The text box, search your library for 3 cards and exile them, and then draw a card. Well, without that cantrip, the spell is not very impressive.
Exile 3 cards out of your own deck? And if that's it, I'm not impressed. The cards he'll exile, though, Mist Hollow Griffin and Eternal Scourge. They're cards that he can actually cast out of exile. So, in a sense, Manipulate Fate actually does still draw him cards. Just not off the top of his deck.
And it's not cards that are terribly exciting to cast.
But 3/3s for 3, 3/3s for 4.
He does have the ability to win an honest game just by casting those Mist Hollow Griffins as flyers and flying over this Leovold.
Let's see if that's what he does. Both players sitting on 3 lands.
And Eric has already drawn his Emrakul and a Food Chain. So in theory, he could make this happen.
All right, so here's Food Chain. Food Chain, interesting one. This is the namesake of the deck from Mercadian Masks. He can sacrifice a creature or remove a creature he controls from the game. Gets any number of mana of any color, which is 1 more than the cost of the creature he gets rid of. So if he exiles a 2-drop, he gets 3 mana. If he exiles a 3, he gets 4. You can only use that mana to play other creature spells. So this is really reliant on him playing these creatures that can be cast out of exile. You exile them, let's say a 4-drop, get 5 mana, use 4 of it to replay the very same card, and then you just plus from 1 mana from where you started.
Yep. Just keep on casting them over and over until you have enough mana to cast your Emrakul.
See, Sam, knowing that one could be dangerous here, will Abrupt Decay it.
There was a point in history where Food Chain was cast in some relatively honest decks. There used to be a Food Chain Goblins deck. That's not what English is up to here.
No, so the idea is he will make, well, he'll use that interaction to continue to get more and more mana, and then eventually just cast Emrakul the Aeon's Torn.
Yes. Get a free turn, bash, probably end the game.
So post Abrupt Decay, Sam will Brainstorm to refill his hand. Then casts Thoughtseize.
And Sam has picked up another Abrupt Decay as well.
So we'll see on Eric English's side a copy of Gurmag Angler, a copy of Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, Brainstorm, Ponder, the Manipulate Fate you mentioned. He's got 1 more in the front, which we'll try to get a look at.
And with Leovold on the table, actually drawing the Emrakul, that's a lot worse if he's not able to get his Food Chain going.
Yeah, it looks like Mist Hollow Griffin, the last card in his hand. That's the 4-drop that he can cast out of exile. But in hand, it's just a 3/3 flyer. And we see now just how much damage Leovold is doing. Ponder, Brainstorm, Manipulate Fate, all in Eric English's hand. Eric will send the Gurmag Angler packing. Eric was 1 card in graveyard. If he took anything else, then once that card was in the graveyard, Eric would have had enough mana to cast Gurmag Angler. 3 more mana from Sam. He'll play True Name Nemesis. The 3/1 will with protection from his opponent. That's going to start the clock where Sam will chip away at those 18 life points.
And now with the hand that largely does nothing, English has to figure out how to win this game pretty quick.
Well, he's got to get this Leovold off the table. I mean, he has 3 copies of Abrupt Decay, but without Ponder and Preordain or Brainstorm to find them, he just has to naturally draw the card.
4th mana source enables him to cast Mist Hollow Griffin, and then he's kind of racing. He does have 2 flyers currently. They're not the most powerful creatures, but the Mist Hollow Griffin at least has the same number of power as the True Name Nemesis. English is currently ahead on life. The Deathrite Shaman for Pardee can definitely make his clock faster, though.
Yeah, that's the hard part. When you're racing and your opponent has an online Deathrite Shaman, Sam can make that play both ways. He can use it to exile instants and sorceries and kill English faster. He can also exile a lot of creatures, as there are a lot of creatures here, and gain life if Eric tries to race.
And English has produced a Deathrite Shaman of his own here, which lets him engage with Pardee's Deathrite Shaman anyway.
And he'll cast Ponder. And remember, this is kind of a poor Ponder. He can look at the top 3 cards of his library, he may put them back in any order, or he may shuffle his library. He does not get to draw a card at the end of this.
Given that he did shuffle, though, that's at least some value.
I mean, if there's not an Abrupt Decay in the top 3, probably needs to shuffle.
Wouldn't be upset about another Food Chain either. You could still go for that.
And Sam will continue to chip away. The True Name Nemesis gets its first swing in, and Eric's down to 15. If he gets one food chain, he can't go for the combo on the spot.
He has multiple creatures. He could exile 2 of them, cast his Griffin, and then go up. So he could go for it immediately as long as Pardee does not counter it or have an Abrupt Decay.
Right, it's just if he sacrifices them both to play the Griffin, then with Griffin on the stack, Sam can Abrupt Decay the food chain.
That would be a bummer.
Eric can try Ponder again. No Abrupt Decay in the top 3. He is shuffling a second time. Without the draw card at the end of it, Ponder not nearly as impressive, but actually still doing work here, unlike Brainstorm, which right now is actually not a card.
Right. It has a text box still, but it's the part where you put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library.
Right.
That's not really the mode that he's looking for.
1 blue, don't draw, draw 0, then put 2 back. I don't really want to cast that spell. And Sam will Abrupt Decay the Deathrite Shaman here. This certainly gives Sam a lot more control over the race if he's the only player with an active Deathrite. Though as you were mentioning, unless Sam has another Abrupt Decay, this means a food chain off the top could help Eric English.
Right. Unless Pardee is able to put up some kind of fight over that. Food chain threatens to end the game.
So what happened there, on end step, Sam Pardee Abrupt Decayed the Deathrite Shaman out of English. In response, English tried to exile his Gurmag Angler to gain life. Sam Pardee then exiled the very same creature, so he gained the life instead. And then a swing puts his opponent down to 12. Another Baleful Strix from English. Swing for 2 in the air. Evens the life totals at 12, but Sam's going to keep going to work. Exiles a spell, knocking his opponent down to 10. That's going to be a 2-turn clock.
And I believe Pardee picked up Force of Will for this turn. Doesn't matter if his second card was a blue card because he now has 6 lands on the battlefield.
Right, he can just, if Eric English does draw the food chain, Sam can just, for 5 mana, hard counter it. And to Eric English, he's last draw there. Not going to help him. It's another Deathrite Shaman. So the first game of this round complete. It's in Legacy, and it's Sam Pardee 1-0 over Eric English.
And at 7, English was dead to 1 more crack and then 2 Deathrite Shaman activations.
And an interesting hold there. That's really, that entire game showcased the strength of labeled Emissary of Trest, the new card out of the Commander series. A huge player in Legacy.
Oh, absolutely. It pretty much embarrasses Spirit of the Labyrinth on power level.
Yeah. Well, it just seems like were there not a labeled there, Eric felt like he could have been a favorite. This draw of 3 Baleful Strixes, that's really strong in this matchup.
He had a bunch of cards in his hand that really weren't doing anything. We saw him cast multiple Ponders just to look at the top 3 and then shuffle if he desired.
All right, so players here do get to see their opponent's deck list, so there's going to be some strategizing. Eric almost single-handedly lost game 1 to 1 card Leovold.
Yep.
So I have to imagine he's going to want to have more answers than just the 3 Abrupt Decays. He's going to board in a lot of cards that can kill the 3/3.
Right, he has a 4th Abrupt Decay, couple Fatal Push are another option that also kills the mana creatures out of the Sultai control deck, so that seems totally reasonable. Big finds here on the sideboard are the 2 copies of Toxic Deluge. That is both another answer to Leovold, and it can clean up True Name Nemesis, which English's deck otherwise cannot do.
Sure, so those seem, so yeah, Abrupt Decay, Fatal Push can answer it. He's got 4 more removal spells. We look at other things, cards like Hymn to Turok. Do you think he might go toward any of those to actually just fight a very fair game?
Hymn to Turok is at his most powerful against a deck like Storm or maybe even Burn, where they need a lot of pieces to go off. It's fine in these fair matchups. It's not as effective as a Thoughtseize would be, but it could see it coming in.
All right, we're going to look over at Sam Pardee's sideboard. He's got a copy of Graph Digger's Cage. That one's pretty excellent. A Nile Spellbomb, Pithing Needle, Dread of Night, Flusterstorm, Golgari Charm, Mindbreak Trap, Submerge, Umazawa's Jite, Painful Truths, and Thoughtseize.
Golgari Charm destroys enchantments. That seems reasonable. Mindbreak Trap does not actually counter spells. It exiles them. So if you go up the food chain,
oh wow, yeah,
go up to Emrakul, you can trap that one.
Okay.
If we're at the point where there's a bunch of Griffins coming in, that might be too little too late, though. Not sure that I want that one.
Well, and actually, Grafdigger's Cage doesn't address food chain because the creatures enter from exile, not the graveyard.
Right.
So can't one doesn't function.